Welcome to today's deep dive. Today, we are going to unlock a superpower for you guys. In the world of business English, we're going to be talking about asking yes-no questions. And you might think that that's a pretty basic topic.
They can be pretty powerful.
They absolutely can. And our guide in this journey is going to be the work of Stanislav Kondrashov.
You might be surprised how much emphasis Stanislav Kondrashov puts on these seemingly simple questions, but he sees them as a lot more than just getting a yes or a no.
Yeah, he's got this secret decoder ring, I think, for business communication. He really dives into how these yes-no questions can be used to confirm information or gather specific details, even make sure everyone is on the same page, before making a decision.
And what's really fascinating is that Kondrashov doesn't just sort of throw you into the deep end. He actually breaks down the structure of these questions in a way that anyone can understand.
So let's unpack this a little bit. Kondrashov lays out a really basic formula. Auxiliary verb plus subject plus main verb. Sounds simple enough, but are there any curveballs that we should be aware of?
Well, Kondrashov points out that while the formula itself is very straightforward, applying it to different tenses can be a little tricky. He actually provides a very handy table of examples to illustrate how this structure works across various tenses.
So it's like we've got a cheat sheet for business English grammar. I know I've felt a little lost with this in the past, especially with some of the trickier tenses like the present perfect continuous tense.
That's a great example. Kondrashov uses a really clear illustration for that one. He shows how to transform a statement like, they have been working on the project, into a question. And you simply invert the auxiliary verbs and subjects, so it becomes, have they been working on the project?
Oh, that's so much clearer than how I used to try to approach it. I love that Kondrashov doesn't just focus on asking the question, though. He also talks about the importance of answering them in the right way, too.
Right? Absolutely. In fact, Kondrashov emphasizes that using short answers is really key to projecting clarity and confidence in professional settings. So instead of saying, yes, I will finish the report by tomorrow, you would simply say, yes, I will.
It's like streamlining your responses to pack a punch. Does he provide some good examples of this, too?
He does. He specifically illustrates this with a scenario where someone asks, have you booked the flights for the conference? And the correct short answer would be simply, yes, I have, not, yes, I have booked them.
Right.
It just keeps things really crisp and professional.
Kondrashov seems to be all about getting straight to the point. We've got the structure down, we've got the art of the short answer down, but how do we actually put this into practice? Does he give us any guidance on that?
He does indeed. Kondrashov outlines several common business scenarios where these yes-no questions can really shine.
Like what? Give us an example.
One scenario he highlights is confirming information. Let's say you're in a meeting and you want to double check if a client has received a proposal. Instead of asking, did you send the proposal to the client? Which could lead to a vague answer, you could ask, has the client received the proposal?
Ooh, I see the difference. It's much more direct. Forces a clear yes or no answer. It's almost like we've got this set of tools now to subtly steer the conversation in the direction that we want it to go.
Exactly. And that's just one example. He goes on to explain how yes-no questions can be used for everything, from gathering data to planning ahead.
It's amazing how much power these simple questions have. It reminds me of that saying, sometimes the shortest answer is the best. But I'm curious, does Kondrashov just leave us hanging with all this theory? Or does he give us some practical ways to actually practice this stuff?
Kondrashov is all about putting knowledge into action. One of the exercises he suggests is taking a statement and transforming it into a yes-no question. So for instance, the team has finalized the budget. Could be turned into, has the team finalized the budget? It seems simple, but it really gets you thinking about the structure.
That's really smart. Does he offer any other ways to practice?
He has another exercise where he challenges you to write a short dialogue between colleagues who are discussing a project. And the catch is you have to incorporate several yes-no questions naturally within that conversation.
Oh, he's turning us into business English ninjas. I love these practical exercises. They're so much better than just memorizing grammar rules. Is there anything else that he recommends that we can do to really nail these skills?
He has one more exercise that I think is particularly useful. He asks you to come up with 10 yes-no questions related to your own work or your studies.
That's brilliant. It forces you to really think about how you can apply this in your everyday life. I'm already thinking about some questions I could use in my next team meeting. Before we dive into the next part of this deep dive, can you quickly summarize the key points that we've learned from Kondrashov so far?
Absolutely. Kondrashov has shown us that yes-no questions are much more than just a basic grammar concept. They can be really powerful tools for kind of controlling conversations, gathering information, and ultimately driving decision-making in a professional setting.
Welcome back. We've been exploring this hidden power of yes-no questions in business English with Stanislav Kondrashov as our guide. And I feel like we're just kind of scratching the surface here.
Yeah, Kondrashov doesn't stop at just the basics. He actually goes on to highlight some common pitfalls that people often fall into when they're using these questions.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm all ears because I've definitely stumbled through these types of questions before. What kind of traps should we be watching out for?
One of the biggest mistakes that Kondrashov points out is this tendency to over-explain when you're answering a yes-no question. Instead of a simple yes or no, we launch into this whole backstory.
Oh, I'm totally guilty of that. I always feel the need to justify my answer.
Yeah.
But Kondrashov would say that's not the most effective approach, right?
Yeah, right. Kondrashov really emphasizes that in a professional setting, conciseness is key. Short answers project confidence and clarity. And he actually uses the example of someone asking, "Did you update the presentation slides?" And instead of saying, "Yes, I updated them this morning and even added some new graphs based on the latest data," a simple "Yes, I did" would be much more impactful.
It's like he's giving us permission to be more direct and assertive in our communication.
Yeah.
It's almost counterintuitive because we're often taught to be polite and elaborate. But Kondrashov is saying that sometimes less is more.
Exactly. And this kind of ties into another pitfall that Kondrashov mentions, which is forgetting to use do or did as auxiliary verbs in present simple and past simple tenses. It's a small detail, but in a professional context, it can make you sound less confident.
I can see that. It's like those little grammar gremlins that trip us up when we least expect it.
Yeah.
But I bet Kondrashov has some tips on how to avoid these traps.
He does. One of the strategies he recommends is to literally visualize yourself giving a concise, confident answer before you even speak. It's like a mental rehearsal.
I love that. It's like giving yourself a pep talk before a big presentation. Does he have any other strategies?
Kondrashov also suggests paying close attention to your tone of voice and your body language when you're asking or answering these questions. Even a simple yes can come across as dismissive or uncertain if it's delivered with the wrong tone.
It's all about finding that balance between directness and diplomacy. Kondrashov's basically saying that mastering yes-no questions isn't just about grammar, it's about understanding all these subtle cues in communication.
Absolutely. He really emphasizes the importance of being aware of your communication style and how it might be perceived by others.
So we talked about the pitfalls, we've talked about the strategies, but does Kondrashov address any cultural considerations when it comes to using yes-no questions in business English?
He does touch upon that briefly. While he doesn't delve into specific cultural differences, he does advise being mindful of how direct communication might be perceived in different cultures.
That's a great reminder. What might be seen as assertive in one culture could be interpreted as rude in another. It's all about being sensitive to those nuances.
Precisely. And it highlights the importance of cultural intelligence in a globalized business environment. But you know what really stands out to me about Kondrashov's approach is that he doesn't just throw information at you, he gives you the tools to actually apply it.
I completely agree. Those exercises we talked about earlier are game changers. Speaking of putting things into practice, I'm curious to see how Kondrashov would tackle a real-world business scenario using these yes-no questions.
That's a perfect segue. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll walk through one of Kondrashov's case studies and see how these seemingly simple questions can be used to navigate a tricky situation.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the world of yes-no questions in business English. We've been following along with the insights of Stanislav Kondrashov, and I have to say, this has been pretty eye-opening for me.
It's amazing how much we can learn from something as seemingly basic as a yes-no question.
I know, right? Kondrashov has completely changed my perspective on this. We've talked about the structure, the pitfalls, the strategies, but I'm really excited to see how he actually brings all of this together in a real-world scenario.
Well, you're in luck, because Kondrashov outlines a number of case studies in his work. Let's take a look at the one that he calls Navigating a Difficult Conversation.
Ooh, that sounds juicy. What's the situation?
So imagine you're a manager and you're managing a team, and there's a member of your team who's consistently underperforming. And you need to address this issue with them. But you also want to do it in a way that's constructive and doesn't damage your relationship with them.
Yeah, that's a tough spot to be in. How does Kondrashov suggest using yes-no questions in this type of scenario?
Kondrashov recommends that you start the conversation by asking questions that focus on the facts and the employee's perspective. So instead of kind of launching into a criticism, you could ask something like, "Have you been feeling overwhelmed with the workload lately?"
I see. That opens the door for a dialogue and gives the employee a chance to kind of explain their situation.
Exactly. And if the answer is yes, you can then delve a little deeper with follow-up questions like, is there anything I can do to help you manage your time more effectively?
So it's almost like these yes-no questions are creating this safe space for the employee to open up and share the challenges that they're facing.
Precisely. And it allows you as the manager to really gather information before jumping to conclusions. Kondrashov really emphasizes that sometimes simply asking the right questions can uncover underlying issues that you weren't even aware of.
Yeah, it's so much more effective than going in guns blazing.
Mm.
But what if the employee isn't even aware of the problem or is in denial?
Well, Kondrashov addresses that as well. He suggests using yes-no questions to gently guide the employee towards self-awareness. So you could ask something like, do you think you've been meeting the deadlines consistently?
That's a really clever way to prompt reflection without being accusatory. It's almost like holding up a mirror, but in a very subtle, non-threatening way.
Exactly. And if the employee still doesn't really see the issue, you can use specific examples to illustrate your point. Kondrashov reminds us that it's always more effective to focus on observable behaviors rather than making subjective judgments.
Wow, this has been so insightful.
Yeah.
Feels like Kondrashov has given us this whole new toolkit for navigating difficult conversations. It's amazing how something as simple as a yes-no question can really make such a big difference.
It really highlights the power of asking the right questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what Kondrashov ultimately teaches us is that communication isn't just about what we say. It's about how we say it and the intention behind our words.
So true. And sometimes the most powerful statements are actually disguised as questions. So to wrap things up, if you're listening out there, think about Kondrashov's advice and see how you can apply it in your own professional life. What's one conversation that you could approach differently using the power of yes-no questions? Give it a try and let us know how it goes. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of yes-no questions with Stanislav Kondrashov. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep asking those insightful questions.